Hey everybody, this is Josh Valentine with Colorado Renewable Energy Society. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we've got Ken Regelson presenting Faster to 100%, Why Solar, Wind, Electric Cars Are a Perfect Match. We're going to start right on time. And Ken, Ken's with EnergyShouldBe.org, and in late 2018, Platte River Power Authority, which provides electricity to Fort Collins, Loveland, Longmont, and Estes Park, committed to generating 100% non-carbon electricity by 2030. Achieving that goal will require major changes in how electricity is used and produced. So tonight, Ken will describe how electric cars can help the RPA and Colorado meet the 100% non-carbon / renewable goal. A couple of technical items for tonight for the GoToWebinar. If you want to submit questions, I'm sorry about that. If you want to submit questions, put them in the questions box in your control panel. And we will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions about CRES or CRES webinars, email them to me, j.valentine@cres-energy.org. We will also put the recording on our YouTube channel, and we will email that out and send that out and put it on our website as well. A note about memberships and our new website. It's still the same address. We have a promotion, so if you sign up for a new membership or renewal, you enter free 6, you get an additional 6 months. This is a brand new website. We have a new membership system. We ask that you go to our website, you'll click on the home page, you'll see the important notice there. And we will need you to sign up for a new membership, and you'll get all of your details emailed to you. So please do that, even if you have already had a membership and it lapsed, you believe your current membership is still current, or you need to renew. Please just go onto our website, use that code, follow the instructions, and you'll get an extra 6 months. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to Ken for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Josh. And we have a couple of polls to begin with. So our first poll, just so I like to know what's going on with my audience, who you are and what you have. So you should be seeing right about a screen right now that gives you the option to answer some questions, and go ahead and click on your choice. And how many of you own cars or light trucks that plug in? And so go ahead and click, and give you just another minute here, another few seconds to finish off. And I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now, and I'll show you the results. So the majority of you own gasoline or diesel vehicle. That's not surprising, but there's a very high number of people that plug in, 43%. And 36% say that the next vehicle will plug in. These are very high numbers. You wouldn't expect this in a general population, but this is CRES, the Colorado Renewable Energy Society. So now let's go ahead and we'll launch the second one. How many people have solar? So solar electric or solar hot water, and this is multiple choice. And by the way, so you know, all of our polls are anonymous. We are not going to share this information except as a whole for this. So go ahead and click on those. I see lots of answers coming in real fast. By the way, we have about 122 people on the webcast right now, on the webinar. I'm going to go ahead and close it now and share the results with you. So quite a few people have solar electric. Quite a few more plan to get it in the future. And quite a few people can't have it for whatever reason. And 2% are saying, I don't plan to have solar ever in the future. That's a very low number. Again, it's CRES. And then one last poll. When we talk about 100% renewable energy as a goal, what does that mean to you? Gotta have 100%, 95% or above is great. Give it another couple of seconds here, and then we'll show you the results. And I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. and show you the results. So about a third of you said gotta have 100%, and about 2/3 said, you know, something a little less than that would be fine for now. So let's go ahead and actually start the presentation here. So I think you all know what the title is. I will say that this is my mom here, and she approves of this presentation, just so you know, in case of any of you had any doubt about that. Now, we're going to talk about 3 key points. There's a utility that was mostly fossil within just a couple of years ago that now has a draft plan for 95% renewables. They will conclude that plan in the next couple of months here at low cost. The second point is that lots of e-cars actually will lower electricity costs for everybody. And lots of renewables can lower charging costs for e-cars. Call this cheap to charge on surplus renewables. Now, a word about these pictures here that I'm using. This might be, you could call this COVID creativity. I asked some friends of mine with plug-in vehicles to give me some pictures of their car, and they actually surprised me. This one surprised me the most. This is Dracula. Why Dracula is driving an electric vehicle, I don't know. But I will point out that this electric vehicle plugs in to solar panels up on the roof. So let's talk about Colorado's energy. Now, my daughter bakes really great cakes, and like most bakers, she follows a recipe. The recipe for our renewable energy future is 1 part 100% renewable electricity and 1 part electrify everything else. So these are just for Colorado, and we'll start with talking about electricity. Most of our electricity still comes from coal and fossil gas. Our total electric bill for everybody in Colorado, all the businesses, government, and all the individuals is $5.5 billion with a B dollars per year. That's a lot of money. And we're talking about electricity, and we can think of electricity almost as a fuel. It's a fuel for our society. It's a fuel for our economy, for our recreation and amusement, but so are the fuels for the other things we're going to talk about. So let's talk about what everything else is. That's transportation, gasoline and diesel, and comfort heat. That's buildings and for our comfort for our buildings, warming them, and water heating for showers and what have you. And here's all the costs. This $8 billion for gasoline, diesel, and fossil gas. That's why we have as much opposition to renewables and electric vehicles as we do. This is, they know that they run the risk of disappearing, and they don't want to do that. They want to not go quietly into the night, and we shouldn't expect them to anyway. So what happens if we take and follow the recipe? Well, for electricity, we're just saying we're not going to increase the amount of electricity for just electricity. This is all the things we use for electricity now, not in the future. So in the future, we're going to have transportation, and we'll show how much electricity, both the cost and how much more we use in just a minute here. So here are the costs, 1.8 billion, 1.2. This adds up to $8.5 billion. This is to buy the electricity for transportation, for electrifying all of transportation. And by the way, this electricity we're talking about, this is 95% renewable. That last 5%, getting ahead of myself here a little bit in the talk, is going to be pretty expensive. So this is $5 billion per year savings. That's like taking and putting a check into every single man, woman, and child's pockets for $700 a year, every year. That's the amount of savings we're talking about. Now, this is just for the fuel. This is just for the fuel for the electric vehicles. It's not the electrification of the vehicles themselves. There's going to be a cost associated with that, particularly early on. We're still in the early on time, although electric vehicles are getting much better and starting to cost less and less as we move forward with mass production on them. But $700 a year for everybody, $5 billion per year for everybody in the state, that's going to be a lot of money that can be spent on paying for the charging systems, paying for, if we need them, upgrades to the electric utility. If we're smart, we won't need too many of them. Paying for buying the electric vehicles themselves. In the case of comfort heat, paying for the upgrades to switch to all electric and doing energy efficiency, of course. So I added in 2 columns here. The climate change for Colorado, this is approximate. This includes the impact of methane leakage from the extraction and distribution of fossil methane, of fossil gas. And it's about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It's not exact. And then I also added in the amount of electricity that we're going to need. So this 30% for transportation, that's 30% more than all of the electricity we use in Colorado. So the total will be 100% for the electricity we currently use, plus another 50%, 150% electricity. So let's move on. And Josh, I'm going to keep going here for just another couple minutes, but why don't you keep, if you're asking questions, I believe you want them in the question and answer part. And Josh, scan through that and pick a question. I'll take one in just a minute, a couple minutes here. I'll take a question or two.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Ready to go.
Yeah, sure. And just a reminder for everyone, if you have a question for Ken, just enter it into your control panel questions box and we'll try to answer it.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's talk about modeling renewables and reliability. By the way, this is my wife and I. This is the costumes are 1920s. The car is 2020, and this is a Kia Niro electric car, and we just bought this. It is a great car. We love it. So let's talk about modeling electric grids and renewables. This is the model itself that we've been working on since 2010. It actually allows us to change the amount of renewables that we have. It uses real data. We'll talk about where the data comes from in a minute. Models don't predict the future. They allow us to cheaply try out possible futures based on assumptions. If we get the assumptions right, there's a reasonable chance that this is actually reasonably predictive. This is done in Microsoft Excel. You can have it for free. Send me an email, and I'll give my email address a little later in the presentation. So where did the data come from? The cost data came from Excel, from Platte River Power Authority, PRPA, and EIA, the Energy Information Agency of the Department of Energy. The annual use load, that's the amount of electricity we use, and generation came from Platte River Power Authority. PRPA, they serve 4 cities, Estes Park, Fort Collins, Longmont, and Loveland. But here's the thing that's interesting, and we've learned this over time. The lessons learned from Platte River Power Authority, PRPA, are general enough to apply to all Colorado, US, and with some exceptions, the world. Most of the rest of this talk is going to be talking about PRPA, but it'll be pretty clear if I'm talking about the entire state or talking about just Excel. So let's compare PRPA and Excel. So PRPA is nonprofit, Excel is for-profit. They both have long-term goals, 100% by 2030, 100% by 2050. Only PRPA has an actual plan. It's draft right now, but it will be real within the next couple of months that shows 95% renewables, and it may show more. They're still tweaking it. The plan will come out in 2020, accomplishment in 2030 with no more cost than BAU, business as usual. Excel doesn't have this 95% plan. Excel says 80% by 2030, by the way. And how much of Colorado is served? About 6%, 54%. Excel's 9 times as big. This blended rate, this is take the total cost we saw before, that $5.5 billion, take the cost for all of the electricity that PRPA sells to end use customers, all the people in those 4 cities, and divide it by the total number of kilowatt hours that are generated, and you get 8 cents. It's just a way to compare numbers directly without worrying about, oh, industrial customers get lower cost for their kilowatt hours. This blends them all together into a single number. Excel is 9.5%. By the way, in addition to the lowest rates in Colorado, Platte River Power Authority has outstanding reliability. Their reliability is some of the best in the country, never mind in Colorado. But if Excel had charged PRPA's rates, this would save all of Excel customers about $400 million per year on their electricity, $1 million per year. Bigger is not better. There's no evidence that bigger is better in terms of electric utilities. Now, this is what's amazing. PRPA's goal and plan, it's historic. This is This is an incredible thing that they are developing. There aren't very many people that were mostly fossil just a couple of years ago that are very aggressively pursuing renewables into the future. Is it perfect? No. Would I like to see 100%? Of course. One of their portfolios that they're presenting in their IRP is 100%. And this needs to be communicated. We need to help spread the word. I'm delighted to speak to any group that you have of any size. And by the way, I don't charge for my time for speaking. This fills out the rest of the chart for those of you that want to know all the details, but I'm going to skip over this. There's an awful lot of information that I want to present. You're going to get all these slides. You'll have the opportunity to download them. So you'll have this information if you want it. So this is the model. These are two different views of what we can see in the model. This is the entire year, every hour of the year. Here's January 1st, here's December 31st. It's the same model, 95% renewables. This includes significant storage, and it has 35% surplus. About this surplus, why do we have surplus? Well, almost any utility that gets electricity above 30% from wind and solar is going to have surplus. Here's why. Well, you know this. The sun shines full blast some of the time, part blast some of the time, and not at all at night. Wind, it's high sometimes, it's medium, and it's very low sometimes. No wind at all sometimes. And electricity use, very high sometimes, very low sometimes. It's not very often that we see zero electricity use. That's a blackout. That's no good. We don't want blackouts. What happens above 30% when you have lots of sun and or lots of wind and very little electricity uses? You will have surplus when you're at this 30% or above level. If you can sell the surplus, even for cheap, it helps keep everybody's rates low. If you don't sell the surplus, then there's still a cost associated with that. You still have to pay the wind farm owners for that electricity that you don't use if you're a utility. There's still a cost for curtailed, turned off wind and solar. The good news is that one person's 35% surplus is another person's treasure. So let's talk about, that's cost. Let's talk about reliability for a few minutes. Now, dark calms, what are those? Dark, no solar. Calm, no wind. And we need to be able to cope with dark calms at a reasonable cost. So this is 7 days of 2017. This is the same thing we looked at before, 95% renewables with big storage. To have reliability, here's zero. These orange areas are something you're going to have to fill in. Think of them like canyons you have to fill in. You could fill it in with fossil gas generation or maybe more storage. Let's talk about fossil gas generation. This is Platte River Power Authority's generation fleet. They have 5 gas turbines already, 388 megawatts. At 95% renewables, we'll have to put new big storage. Maybe it'll go here next to Rawhide, their coal plant. At 95% renewables, you don't run this very much. CREG, they are a part owner in CREG, but that's going to go away well before the 2030 timeframe that we're looking at, that they are looking at in their planning. So gas turbines, that's one way to fill it in. Another way is more storage. Now, the narrow canyons, think of these as like a slot canyon or Grand Canyon of the Gunnison, Black Canyon of the Gunnison here. A narrow canyon is low cost to fill relatively. The storage that you add, it gets used many times per year. That means that storage cost gets spread over many uses. But this area here, think of this as the Grand Canyon of dark calms for 2017. It's expensive to fill with storage because you only get to use the storage once or twice per year. Okay, so you see this chart. I'm going to show you exactly the same thing in chart form, but I'm going to spend just about 30 seconds on it. This isn't enough for this slide, but you get the concept. That's more important than the details, but here are the details. 85% to 100% renewables. Here's the utilization, 266, good utilization, 10 times a year, bad utilization. The thing that's interesting is going from, say, 90% renewables with a big battery takes 4 times as much battery to get us to 95% renewables. We're holding the solar, wind, and existing hydro that Platte River Power Authority has constant. Okay, That's fine, but to get that last percent from 99% to 100%, we have to go to 25 times the 95% number. That's why this cost is just prohibitive. It just doesn't make any sense with existing short-term storage, at least as we understand it. This suggests that there's a sweet spot with regard to renewables, with regard to storage, and that we maybe need something else with storage, surplus electricity for green, using the surplus electricity for green natural gas or liquid fuel, or maybe it's super cheap used electric vehicles. Sorry, I just got a distraction here. I had to get rid of that. So super cheap used electric vehicle batteries, or maybe it's something else. There are about 5 or 6 companies that are actively pursuing finding a solution to this particular problem, not to short-term storage, but to long-term storage. Okay, so before we take on this, next topic, go ahead and ask me a question or two here, Josh.
Sure. How about this one? Is it reasonable to predict that solar PV installations in the coming years will keep up with the increased electrical need from the grid for powering electric vehicles? How about for comfort heating and water heating?
So for electric vehicles and for comfort heating, yes, it's a big increase over the amount of electricity that we use right now, but there's no lack of electricity capability of wrench-ready projects that we will be able to access, and we'll be able to look at that actual information here in a little bit, that talks about how can we get to 95%, for example, for the entire state. So that'll come in, about 20 minutes here. You have a second question for me?
Sure. With the reduction of commercial use, why are we still getting charged for quote unquote peak rates? Even the auto insurance costs are issuing rebates.
Well, that's an interesting question, and that's a big, complicated question, I'm afraid to say. Part of this has to do with the way electric utilities are structured. When we start using less electricity, right now they get less fuel, they need less fuel. That's the only savings that they have. Most of their cost is in other things, and so there's no particular savings for them. They still need to be made whole. And that's a problem. It's a problem for all of us. And we're very early in the process of this. And electric utilities are not known for being nimble. That's the second part of that question. And if you can follow on with an additional question at the end, I'm going to have lots of time to take questions. By the way, this talk runs, my part of the talk will run for 45, 50 minutes of actual talking, taking a little extra time for a few questions in between. And then at the end, I'll stay as long as you want and answer questions. And you can always email me with questions as well. And either we'll arrange a phone call or I'll answer on the email itself. So let's talk about the cost of renewables. What we see is eye-poppingly low cost for renewables in Colorado. It's amazing. This is what we saw. I'm not going to spend very much time at all on this chart. This is from an Excel RFP, request for proposals in 2017. They got back a fantastic number of responses, and the answers were eye-poppingly low. Literally, I talked to people all over the world, and I had a chance to talk to somebody from, I believe it was England, and they had seen this chart, and they were surprised as we were that this costs are low, low, low. That's in 2017 that they got these price costs. I'll tell you that the cost for solar, for example, which I've just hidden, is now, the bids that are coming in right now, we just got an announcement of a bid that's less than half of the cost that Excel got in their bids in our RFPs in 2017. So the other thing you need to know about this, in addition to it being eye-poppingly low, they left 95% of the bids on the table. They didn't use but 5% of these bids. This is Excel talking to the PUC in 2018 on what they call their clean energy plan that was accepted and is being implemented in Colorado. And that'll give them 55% renewables by 2022. The plan includes unprecedented, I would have said eye-poppingly, low pricing. That's all you need to hear as far as this piece is concerned. Just to put this in perspective, you would have to be able to build a new coal or gas generator for free, And even then, the costs of operating it and maintaining it would be more than the all-in, including profit for the owners of the wind farms and solar farms. The all-in cost for electricity from new wind and solar would be less, and that was in 2017. Even existing fossil plants cost more for operations, maintenance, and fuel than all-in new wind and solar costs. Some of these topics are real fast. I'm going to go through this next topic as well, and then I'll take a couple more questions. So let's go ahead, and I hope you're enjoying the slides here of some of my creative friends. Selling surplus for cheap lowers everyone's costs. This is a Tesla Model 3. So let's look at why that's true. So Platte River Power Authority, remember most of our data comes from Prpa, and so we're going to look at them specifically, and they have this great plan coming up. So in 2014, they had historic hydro and about 75% fossil, mostly coal. In 2023, we believe strongly that they will be at 60%, right around 60%, maybe a little bit higher than that. Renewables and 40% fossil. And when they have that, they'll have about 4% surplus. What PRPA calls surplus is, to give you the utility perspective, is it's must sell. The reason it's must sell is because it increases rates otherwise, and they do not want to increase rates. In 2025, the advocates that are working to push Platte River Power Authority forward on renewables would like to see maybe 80% renewables, and then they'll have roughly 20% surplus. This is plus or minus, depends on how much storage you have and other parts of the puzzle. And then in 2030, there's an exclamation point. Remember, they have a draft plan that they intend to take that shows at the same cost as what they think they're going to have in the future for business as usual for 95% renewables. It might not be this exact mix, the exact mix that we're using, the modeling that we did with this mix, but it's going to be something very close to that. And they're working on this 2030 plan. They announced the portfolios. They're unlikely to back down from them very much. They might back down from them a little bit. Maybe it'd be 90% renewable energy. But here's the problem. This 30 to 40% surplus, depending on whether it's solar or wind, would be $25 to $50 million per year rate increase if the surplus isn't sold. That's a big increase for them. Their total revenue is about $200 million a year. This, if it's $50 million, that's a 25% rate increase. Or sell it for cheap and save everyone's rates. So this 25 to 50 million, if the surplus isn't sold, if you don't sell the surplus, you got to turn it off. That's the rules for the electric grid. Just like they turn off coal and natural gas units, that's called curtailment. We turn them down or we turn them off. Turning down wind and solar, that's not something that we want to see. That's not maximizing the amount of renewables. When you don't maximize renewables, then you do in fact maximize or you perpetuate fossils. Or we can sell it for cheap, but who are we going to sell it to? Well, one answer is other utilities. You may have heard of this energy imbalance market. That's selling electricity for cheap to other utilities, surplus. And existing customers, that's the other choice. So I do have another poll here, and let's see if I can get that launched pretty quickly. If I can't, we'll move forward. So all other things being equal, who would you like your electric utility to sell any surplus renewables to? Choose one of the following. You can only choose one. Other utilities, us customers, or both. And I'll let this run for a little bit now. We've got about 40%, 50% have voted. I'll let it get up to 60%, and then I'll stop and share the polls with you. So we'll close the poll, and that's just to keep things moving and share the results with you. 11% said other utilities, 8% said us customers, and 81% said both. This is a very well-educated audience, is what I would say. I believe both is the right answer also. We'll talk more about the energy imbalance market in about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. Okay, so let's go ahead and take one more question, Josh.
Sure thing. All right, this is the first question we received actually from Martin, who's a board member for CRES. Martin is asking, Ken, have you had a chance to discuss your concept with people who run utilities, including PRPA or Excel, and what feedback did you get from them?
Yes, the answer is yes to that question for Platte River Power Authority. They listened very respectfully and they nodded their heads some. Right now, they're mostly moving ahead with energy imbalance markets, but actually the chargers that they are recommending people get, and they actually providing rebates for, set the stage for allowing cheap to charge. And they won't announce a program. They're going to be very tight-lipped about a program until they're darn well ready to announce it. And then in terms of Excel, actually, I just submitted testimony with the fellow whose name is Dan Regelson. He might even be a relative to the Public Utilities Commission on Excel's time of use rate, saying we don't want time of use, we want time of renewables, and explaining why. And I'd be happy to send that testimony on to anybody that's interested. So back to the presentation now. E-cars are awesome. They're cheap to fuel, they're fun, and they could lower everyone's electric bills, not just the owners of electric vehicles, everybody's, whether you have an electric vehicle, whether you have solar, any of those. Before I get started on that though, I just ran into this study and I just got to tell you, I just love this. I'm not going to read it, you can read it here. We'll read this one. It says 3 in 4 people polled said that they would prefer to date an electric vehicle owner. This is, so there you go. Now you know the truth. Okay, let's talk about fuel savings. Gasoline is about 10 cents per mile for fueling a gas vehicle. That's a 30 mile per gallon vehicle. And I assume $3 a gallon, which is what it's been pretty close to for a long time. If we change it to $2 a gallon, this just goes down to 7 cents. And the savings is a little bit less. But that's 15,000 miles per year, $1,500 per year to fuel your gasoline vehicle. The average US residential rate is 3.5 cents per kilowatt. I'm sorry, that's wrong. 3.5 cents per mile for typical electric vehicles, electric cars. $500, that's a savings of $1,000 per year. Remember we talked about the savings for everybody? Well, here you go, here's part of it. Now in 2015, my wife and I bought a Nissan Leaf. There were only 2 practical electric vehicles, the Tesla Model S and the Leaf had a realistic 80-mile range when we bought it. It still did when we sold it just a couple months ago here. And when we went looking for cars in late 2019, we found 5 practical electric cars at lower cost, all of them with 220 miles of range or more, most of them with 240 miles realistic range or more per tank of electricity per full battery. That's a phenomenal change. So backing up here, we went from 80 to 240 miles of range. That's a 3x improvement in 5 years. And the cost is probably a bit lower than what we paid for our Leaf back in 2015. Actually, maybe even quite a bit lower. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so we had this model and we said, oh, it doesn't have e-car charging in it. Can we put it in? And it took us a while to figure it out, but we did eventually get that in there. So we actually can model what happens with charging electric vehicles, but you got to make assumptions. So we started with 240 miles of range. We said you're always going to wake up to 120 miles, half a tank. And anytime you want to drive down to Pueblo, you can override for a full charge. Anytime you'd like to, easy to do. Almost all of these cars have apps and they allow you to do this through the app or through the car itself. Okay, and the other assumption we made was an average of 30 miles per day. Now I'm gonna show you the results of this in just a second, but I gotta tell you, when you're modeling, generally what happens is you do the model and you try it and you don't like the results, and you look at it and you say, this is wrong, and you fix it, and then you fix it some more, and you figure out what it is. And in this case, the first set of results looked almost exactly to the slide I'm about to show you. I'm sorry, there's one more assumption you have to make. The dangers of getting ahead of myself on the presentation. Okay, so what we said is when it's cheap to charge, there's surplus electricity, we're gonna say fill her up and go to 240 miles, so 120 miles of additional range. And here's the results, and we were convinced it was wrong. Couldn't possibly be 90% of the charging on the surplus. Couldn't possibly be that good. You never get that good. And we looked at it and we thought about it for 4 or 5 days. And I'm going to tell you in 15 seconds, in just a minute, I'll start in a minute, 15 seconds, why this is correct. Okay, but let me explain the chart a little bit. The green, that's leftover surplus. This is every hour of the year from January 1st to December 31st. The purple, that's electric vehicle charging and e-cars charging using surplus. And the dark blue, that's probably charging off of fossils. That's that I gotta wake to 50% when there's no surplus to charge me up. Gotta wake up to 50%, okay? That's this dark blue, this little tiny bit of dark blue, 10% of the charging that happens. Here's why it works. This is 120 miles when you go from here to here. So when you go backwards, it's 120 miles of range. You have 120 miles of additional range. 4 full days from full back to half at 30 miles per day. So the question is, when are there more than 4 days of space, of no surplus? Like right here, there is 4 days here, but it wasn't 4.5 days, it was just 4 days. Here with the dark blue, that's where there's more than 4 days. This chart is, as near as we can tell, correct. Just so you know, when we do modeling, not with the electric vehicle charging, the Platte River Power Authority, as far as we know, is not yet doing this. But when we did the regular modeling, we would get, when we started with the right assumptions, the same assumptions as they used, we would get within 1 or 2% of their results. This model is actually pretty close. And then, of course, we wanted to get to 95% renewables. And so this is where we think that Platte River Power Authority will be in 2030, 200,000 plugins, 95% of non-commercial charging will use up about half of the surplus. Commercial vehicles and buses would use up about 3/8 more of the surplus, leaving about 1/8 of the original surplus would still be available. This is amazing. So here's the key question. Do e-car chargers exist today that allow us to charge when there's cheap to charge? And the answer is almost. Here it is. This has been in my garage for more than a year. This actually allows me to charge when there's surplus electricity in California. If I lived in California, I would actually get a reward each month. I'd get a check each month that was my reward for charging on the surplus. This actually exists now. So let's fill out the rest of this chart. When you're charging cheap to charge, maybe it's 1 cent a mile. And in fact, maybe for the first 10,000 vehicles, we say free charging. The amount of additional cost to all users is practically nothing for 10,000 cars. Maybe we say 10,000 cars, 10 years. Here's the savings if it's free. And the reason to do this is because you don't want to lose any of the electric vehicles that are being sold, the tens of thousands of electric vehicles that we anticipate selling in the next few years. Now, here's a question. What's the best choice for using the surplus? And actually, I'm going to add an additional column here, additional row here, but I'm going to tell you what the answer is because we already have a pretty good idea what that looks like. Okay, and the key issues are how it's used. That's just what we're talking about here. So electric car, hot water heaters, electric hot water heaters, and pre-cooling our homes. We can do that with air conditioning right now. Preheating our homes if you move to electrified heat. The amount of storage, how long does it last? Well, we know it's 4 days when you're full here, 1 to 2 days for electric hot water heater, and just a few hours for most buildings. Score a win for electric cars. Let me just ask this question since Martin brought it up. Great question. What about for electric, will the energy imbalance market work? Well, in terms of storage, it's going to be that amount of storage that we showed, that dark column, was not 4 days long. I believe it was about 2 days long. It was big, but it wasn't giant. And remember, that's once a year. The real ones, they're far less than that. The utilities are not going to have this kind of storage, or will barely have this kind of storage available. 30 miles, well, that's the typical use. That's 9 kilowatt hours per day, and we can figure out what the impact per year is. So it's 30% of total electricity used, and that covers all of transportation, commercial and residential. For hot water heater, we just said 3 people, there are 110,000 homes, and this is just electric resistance, it's not a heat pump, and that's 8%. So let's see, 4 days of storage, 30% of electricity use that you can modify. Here's 8%. If you're going to invest, this might be a better choice in terms of investment. And then we don't know the answer for these. I could use volunteers to research this, or people that understand this issue better than I do. It'd be great to have some volunteers for this, and just contact me. I'd be happy to talk to you. Now, is it just me that's saying that this issue of electric vehicles lowers bill for everybody? And the answer is no. In Minnesota, they did a study that showed that they'd be able to save on residential utility customers $71 per year by doing off-peak charging. Well, off-peak, honestly, is not nearly as good as on surplus, because on surplus means you've got renewables. It's 7:10 and we're here. Let's go ahead and take another question.
Sure thing. All right, we've got a number of questions. So someone asks, I am told that we need transmission to utilize renewables efficiently in the future. What's your take?
So some amount of transmission, I believe, is incredibly useful, and some upgrades to the existing transmission system. A lot of what utilities talk about is for that energy imbalance market, and I do not think we should be investing tons of money in transmission. It's not a question of whether we should make some investments in transmission. It's a question of whether we should be making lots and lots of investments in transmission for the energy imbalance market. If the wind farm is way the heck over there and there's no transmission, we're going to have to build at least some transmission to get to that. But these 1,000-mile or 500-mile projects that the utility companies love to talk about, that's more about energy imbalance market than it is about reality of what I think we need moving into the future. There's renewables everywhere pretty well. So let's talk about how people make decisions. So 10% of the population, maybe it's 20%, I don't know, but they're analysts. If it pencils out, if they can make it work to their values, maybe it's just the money, or it's money, plus I care about climate change too. If it pencils out, they're gonna do it. And another 10 or 20%, they're early adopters. If it's cool, then I'll do it. I'll go ahead and buy this electric vehicle. That's what we're talking about. That's what we need to get people to do. And 80% or so of the population is influenced by other people. And the truth of the matter is probably 99% of everybody is at least somewhat influenced. Even the people that call themselves the biggest analysts in the world are still influenced by other people, like maybe it's the spouse. And here's the fundamental problem that we have is these are Hyundai Konas. They're available for sale just like the Kia Niros, and one of them's gasoline and the other's an electric vehicle, and there's no way for a mere mortal to tell. There's no way for practically anybody to tell unless they're really familiar with these. We need to do something to make it really clear to people because we got to influence other people. And so what I think we're going to try, what we are going to try is bumper stickers. They're removable adhesive, or maybe we'll use magnets, and they identify which one is the electric car. So here's 2 bumper stickers that we're working on, ecarheart.org or ecarlove.org, either one. I own the domain. There's no website there yet. If you're willing to work on a website as a volunteer, contact me. You're getting the point here as terms of we need some help. The bumper stickers are ready to go. Unfortunately, the company that would make the bumper stickers that we'd like is closed at the moment for the same reason that so many businesses are closed. But I do have one more poll here that I'd like to call up, and that's, are you interested in a bumper sticker? And this is a single choice. Go ahead and click on that. Just go as fast as you can so we can talk some more. And you notice my next car plugs in. That's for people that have gasoline vehicles. And we've got more than 60% have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results with you. So an awful lot of people said yes, and a third said, wow, a third said maybe, and a third said no. Great. Thank you so much for that. And we're going to hide the results and come back to the presentation, and we're going to move right along. So I've got some short topics. They didn't really fit into the rest of the presentation. They take about 2 minutes each. And to be honest, we're about 10 or 15 minutes from the end of the presentation, including review. So hang in there for just a few more minutes, and I will take as many questions as we can fit in after the presentation. So e-bus savings. Oh, one more thing that you could volunteer for me for. If you have pictures using your e-car in some fashion, standing in front of it and smiling, charging up, whatever it is that you think would help tell the story, I'd love to have them, and I'll be happy to use them inside my presentation. So let's talk about electric buses and the savings from those. Here's the savings for the fuel. 46 cents per mile. These are the information for this, and you will get the slides. There are links to where this information came from on all of the slides that have information where we can provide it from some other source. 46 cents per mile, that's for diesel. $16,000 per year, 34,000 miles per year, that's the average transit bus. $11,500 per year savings from going with electricity. This is Excel's rate for RTD electric bus charging right now. And presumably, if you could do cheap to charge, it would be cheaper still and bigger savings. And this is not the reason to go to electric buses. Here's the real reason. Well, okay, the other one's a good reason too. The maintenance costs are spectacular on diesel buses, $1.53 per mile, $52,000 per year, and it's a third of that for electric buses. $33,000 per year savings. That's versus $11,500 per year savings up here. So I was asking about, I've had this question, and I don't know the answer to this, but I believe it can be found out for Colorado. For Colorado, all Colorado, if we start using less fossil gas, well, there are fixed costs. Is that going to mean the cost of gas goes up? And that's a good reason to frown in my book, because anytime you have things going up, that's a bad thing. You know, they were trying for American Gothic here and deserve a lot of credit for moving forward with that. Hopefully you got a little bit of a laugh. Okay, these dark blue lines, that's the transmission, the big pipelines for natural gas in Colorado, for fossil gas. And these blue funny things, that's fossil gas storage. And they have costs associated with them. And the less you use them, the more cost per therm. A therm is just a measurement like a gallon of gasoline, it's a therm of fossil gas. The cost per therm is going to go up from the fixed costs, these fixed costs. How much? I don't know. Somebody that's interested in researching that, I actually have somebody researching it some, and they might want some help for that. It's a complicated problem to try and figure out. There's a study from California, though, that says, by the way, natural fossil gas costs are going to go up by 2.5 times because of this specific issue of the what happens with the gas distribution system and storage system. Are there enough wrench-ready renewables for all Colorado? This isn't the exact answer that somebody asked, but it does provide a pretty good suggestion. So here's this chart again, left 95% of the bids on the table. And a good friend of mine who's not great with numbers, but is great with concepts said, is there enough renewables for all of Colorado? When I showed this to her, and I said, I don't know. And I said, but I'll give you an answer. So the next morning I went back and modeled it. It wasn't hard to model. What we did is we took just the wind bids, not the rest of them, and just the solar with battery storage. Unoptimized, we could do much better than this in the real world. We just took them and ran them into the model with all of Colorado's electricity use, and we came up, yeah, we could get 95% renewables and 60% surplus. This is in 2017. This is what they got at the time. I can guarantee you there's still lots of room for wind turbines, lots and lots and lots of room for solar panels out there. What about the energy imbalance markets? I don't think they're going to work all the time. I don't think the utilities think they will work all the time either. But that's why we want to be very careful with big transmission investments. So energy imbalance markets, that's selling the surplus for cheap to other utilities. And what we did is we said, well, we don't know how to think about this and we don't have the data. And then we started thinking about it and maybe we do have the data. These are balancing authorities. So public service, that's Excel's old name. They run the balancing authority for a big chunk of Colorado, much bigger than they actually serve. And these are other balancing authorities in the Western Interconnect. The Western Interconnect doesn't connect very much to the Eastern Interconnect that's over here. The people we're going to trade with are our neighbors, we think, the most, because that's the biggest connections that you have in terms of transmission. Unless you're going to build giant, expensive transmission lines all the way across the country, you're not going to do much trading except with your neighbors. We think that. We might not be right. We'd like to have a discussion with people at the Public Utilities Commission, what have you. And so we just took 7 days of data because we could get it. We normalized it. So that means that instead of saying Colorado's twice the population, they have more wind turbines, more megawatts of wind than Wyoming, we're going to balance them out. So we're looking at just the wind resource itself. So one means you got 100% of your generation is wind, and we stacked them up. Here are the 4 balancing authorities. Let's look at this area right here and all these other peaks. It's not going to work. The energy imbalance isn't going to work, the market, because everybody has surplus at the same time. When everybody has surplus at the same time, it's not going to work. And this canyon right here, down here, not very much wind generation for anybody. If you don't have much wind, you don't have any surplus, you're not going to be able to sell it to anybody. It's not going to work. There are hours in between. It'll work right here, but it sure doesn't look like it's going to work for most of the hours. Oh, it looks like Pace will be able to sell to some of the other balancing authorities, but not much. We have the full year's worth of data. We need to look at it some more. So we're working on modeling for that. I've got volunteers and other people that are working on these issues. Might not work. So my answer is just like your answer. We're going to do both. We want to sell it, but I say we sell it first to existing customers. Okay, I'm about actions. Yes, I love the data, but the purpose from my standpoint of data is to move us to action. Data for just data's sake is just fun. We talked about these things already. I'm not going to go into them again. Here's the actions. Ask everyone you know if PRPA, particularly elected officials, and people at the Public Utilities Commissions, at the regulatory agencies, the Colorado Energy Office, and also anybody at any utility, electric utility. If PRPA has a plan, not a goal, a plan to get to 95% by 2030 at lower rates than Excel, why can't all electric companies? And tell them, this plan is historic. You need to take a look at it. You need to pay attention. Offer them a talk from me. Test drive an electric vehicle. Most of you have. If you haven't, not sit in it, drive it. They are fun, and you really don't get it until you get a chance to sit in them and drive them yourself. And tell everybody you got, my next car will plug in if you don't have an electric vehicle. Now, even if you do, if you have a second gas vehicle, my second car will plug in when I replace it. Send fun plug-in pics to me. Email me for a bumper sticker. I don't have them yet, but when I get them, I'll keep your email. Tell everybody I want cheap to charge, all the people, everyone we talked about before. I want to sell the surplus renewables cheaply to customers first, then other utilities, and then tell everybody anything that doesn't support maximum use of cheap renewables perpetuates expensive fossils. We have a time of use program that Excel is in the process of saying that they're going to push onto all people in all of their customers, residential customers in Colorado. It perpetuates fossils. All it does is it pushes the peak to later, so you can run the fossils later in the evening more than you do. Oh, there's good reasons to reduce the peak too, but you know what? With renewables, the peak's not going to look anything like what it does before. And what's more is with storage dropping in cost as fast as it does, it's already cheaper to do storage than to do peak generation units. We want TOR, not TOU, time of renewables. So let's review. We know the recipe for Colorado. There's a giant savings of moving to a real energy future that we can all live with. Models don't predict the future, but you can have this one and you can try different assumptions and see if you can beat the utilities. Bigger is not better for electric utilities. And look at what PRPA has, a plan moving forward. It's draft, but a plan moving forward from 95% renewables. We know why there's surplus, and there's lots of wind and solar. We know that reliability is a serious issue, and this is hard to fill with storage. We know that we see eye-poppingly low costs, and that we got to sell the surplus if we want to avoid rate increases, and we can sell it to a variety of people. The best place to sell it from my standpoint is cheap to charge from surplus. The results are spectacular. 90% of charging on the surplus when PRPA in 2023, very soon, 60% renewables. They already have, in fact, there'll be 50% renewables if the virus didn't slow them down. It was looking like they would start being 50% renewables in July. Chargers exist. The cost savings is spectacular. Electric cars look like the best place for customers to store things, and we already know that we ought to do the energy imbalance market also, but we shouldn't spend tons of money in either place. And 99% of people are influenced by others. We need to get them to understand that that vehicle in front of them, just because you are a geek and love electric vehicles, you know, I can recognize a Tesla a block away, and a lot of people don't know that the stylized T that's on the back of most Teslas is actually a Tesla. And even if they could say that, they might not be able to connect it with an electric vehicle while they're driving. We are not an average audience. And many days the imbalance market won't work. And here's the list of actions. And now I'll take questions. And go ahead and lay them on me, Josh, and keep yourself visible. But I can't hear you. Josh, we can't hear you. You're muted.
There we go. Sorry about
Yay.
that.
No worries.
So Daniel asks, can you expand on the free charging for cars and buses? I still cannot grasp how or why utilities would want to offer anything for free.
It's because the cost increment for a limited number, not for 200,000 vehicles, but for maybe 10,000 vehicles, is so small that it's barely visible. It's way less than most of the rate increases that Excel gets on a regular basis. And the reason to do it is because it draws attention. It gets people's attention. You'll get so much advertising, probably the cost of advertising charging program will be more than offering 10 years of 10,000 vehicles charging on the surplus. You don't get it for free when you're not charging on the surplus. You still pay the regular electricity rates. It's only when you charge on the surplus, but it catches people's attention. It's like almost free marketing for the utilities. Now, is it perfect? No, and you don't want to offer it to everybody, and you don't make it unlimited. You say 10 years for that. And remember that it saves everybody's cost when you get those electric vehicles charging off of the surplus. It saves everybody cost. Why? That's a great question. Maybe that's the key question that you're asking. If I don't answer your question, ask it again. But since I'm on a roll, let me go ahead and answer this question too. Why does it save everybody money? Well, first, there are two parts. Most wind and solar farms are owned by somebody else, not the utility. And even when they're owned by the utility, it's still cost. Most of the cost for renewables is fixed costs up front, capital costs, and very little maintenance costs, very little operational costs in them compared to coal-fired power plants or natural gas plants. You still got to pay that back, even if the wind turbines aren't running. If they're not making electricity when the wind's blowing, the cost is going to be higher associated with that. You got to pay that back in some fashion. If it's a wind farmer, you literally got somebody else, not the utility, you literally got to pay them back. Well, you got to pay the utilities back for the money too. That's one cost. That's a problem. That's for both solar and wind, but wind has a particular problem, and that's the tax credit. It like doubles the cost associated with curtailing, turning off wind when the wind is blowing. And that's because there's a tax credit, a production tax credit. If you don't produce, you don't get it. You don't get the production tax credit. So if you turn them off, you don't get the production tax credit. That's more than the cost of the electricity from wind farms. Solar has an upfront tax credit. It doesn't have this problem. So that's the other part of this topic. And I don't know if that's part of Daniel's question or not, but thank you for the question. And let's keep those questions rolling here.
So Barbara has a couple of questions. One of the key impediments to EV adoption is charging infrastructure. Do you have a forecast for how soon the key interstate and state highway charging stations will be installed?
The answer is that the Colorado Energy Office just released a massive plan that talks about accelerating high-speed charging. Low-speed charging, really, that's not a problem. Most people right now, at least, have charging at home. If you don't have charging at home, maybe your next apartment will have a place to plug in your vehicle that plugs in, or talk to your workforce. We're seeing plans getting in place where 20% in some municipalities, where 20% of buildings, or the parking spaces in buildings will need to be plug-in car ready to go with charging. So, and the second thing is you don't need to charge all that often for most people with that 240-mile range. When you got an 80-mile range, you may have to charge almost daily with that, or every other day. But with 240-mile range, you can get a lot further with that. High-speed chargers, they're showing up. Walmart has quite a few of them, and they're showing up all over the state along the interstates in the same fashion that superchargers exist for the Teslas. Am I going to guarantee that on a Sunday, on a Sunday afternoon, that there isn't going to be a line at the charging stations for a little while? No. But increasingly, you'll find places to plug in. When we traveled with my friend's Model 3 to Steamboat, we just found a regular plug-in, and it gave us enough charge to get us back to the next supercharger, even though Steamboat at the time didn't have high-speed charging. There's a lot of new plug-in high-speed chargers. Go to plugshare.com. That shows you where the high-speed chargers are. But the times that you need high-speed charging is relatively minimal. Most of the time, people are fine with level 2 charging. So that's the basic infrastructure question, and that's pretty well available now in many places. Is it perfect? No, but the more people that ask for it, the sooner it'll get perfect. They were getting places. Oh, there's a place we go regularly that is social, but they have a set of chargers. They also have a giant solar PV system, and the electric vehicle chargers are free. Businesses are increasingly going to have free electric vehicle charging or very low cost electric vehicle charging because they get you in, and the electricity just doesn't cost that much unless you're doing very high speed charging.
So I'm going to expect you to have a definitive answer for this next one because we're in such uncertain times, but how will the economic impact of COVID-19 affect the adoption rate of EVs in Colorado?
I love the question. I'm liking reading the answers that I see out there from different pundits on this. I'm not smart enough to predict the future in that regard. Some people actually argue that because of the seriousness of the issue, that it'll actually accelerate the move to renewables. I don't know if you know this, but the disease itself is worse where the air pollution is bad. And a lot of the air pollution comes from transportation. Hang on just a second. I had to have the phone running before because it was one of the ways that Josh and my other co-presenters here or mediators, not mediators, moderators, were going to contact me if everything went to hell in a handbasket, which apparently it didn't because we still have questions coming in. Outstanding. I love it.
We mediate as well, so that's cool.
Yeah.
William asked, how does the charging system know when there is a surplus of generation?
So the charger itself has a revenue grade electric meter in it. So it knows with an acceptable to utilities measurement of the electricity use of how much you use for charging. And it has a Wi-Fi connection. It just talks to the web. And so, and most of the people, if you don't have the Wi-Fi connection, you don't have the right charger, you don't get to play.
All right, so maybe you need to clarify something for somebody. I'm not sure which graph Corey is referring to, but he states your graph shows 4 days without renewables in the summer. That doesn't make sense to me. Wouldn't it be in the winter?
So the answer is that because the electricity use is higher, remember you get surplus when electricity use tends to be on the lower side. Now, sometimes even when it's high, you get surplus. If you've got both solar and wind, then you're high. Now, but there isn't that much wind in the summertime, and summertime is our peak electricity usage. So that's why the summertime you have less of this as an issue. You would have to plug in the daytime to be able to take advantage of surplus solar. And this model, this run, although the model is capable of doing other times, we actually just assume that people would plug in at night. But the answer is you've generally got the right concept. As you add more PV, more solar, then you have more surplus during the summer. and you will in fact have more charging available, surplus available for charging during the daytime in the summertime. So it's not a simple question, but you always have to remember every single hour is unique in terms of how much wind it has, how much solar it has, and how much electricity it's using. And surplus only occurs when total renewables exceeds total usage.
We have sort of complementary questions.
Sure.
Let's go with this first one. Is there a future role for the electric utilities using car batteries for taking energy out as well as putting extra surplus in? I think you addressed that, but.
Sure. The answer is definitely maybe. Right now, what I think is very, very likely is using the car batteries to use up the surplus, so use up the excess. And that's just a question of when you charge, so that you charge when there's surplus. But the question that you're asking is an excellent question, which is, they call it, that's grid to vehicle. But there's vehicle to grid the other way, where you use that surplus that from 240 down to supply electricity to the grid. Now, right now in the United States, as far as I know, none of the car manufacturers allow that in their warranty. That's a good reason to not have it. In Japan, Nissan supports that within their warranty to a limited extent. But to be honest, I don't think it's all that necessary, at least at the 95% level. And when that last 5%, yeah, it becomes useful to do, but I'm just not sure that I buy it. I'm just not sure that the cost will be worth the value. Am I prescient in terms of doing this? No, I can look at models and say this is what the models show us, but I'm not in a position to say this is exactly what's going to happen.
And then the follow-up question from someone else is, what about utility scale demand response utilizing car batteries?
So demand response so that's what we're talking about with cheap to charge, is you're saying this is a good time to charge. Time of use rates, all that does is it pushes you off. It does not solve the issue of what we really want, which is maximum use of renewables. That's the lowest cost electricity. That's what we should be using maximally. By the way, Excel has 4% curtailment right now at 30% renewables, just so you know. This isn't a theoretic problem. That was in 2018. We know that because we've seen graphs from Platte River that show that I've got all kinds of stuff going on all at once, and I'm just making me very nervous here. But I'm still good, right, Josh?
Yeah,
okay.
I think we can go for 3 more minutes, and we still have over 100 people on. So if that's okay with you.
It's okay with me to go for more than 3 more minutes, but
Okay.
I don't know if it's okay with you.
I can't. Well, I usually don't like to go over 15 minutes on these, but we'll see what kind of questions, if these questions are interesting to you. So the next one is,
did I answer that last question well enough?
You did, in my opinion. Is PRPA working towards using EV batteries as part of their distributed storage system?
Not at this point in time, again, for the reasons that I talked about before. That's probably a question prior to one of the others we answered. So that's not part of what they're looking at specifically. But again, one of the reasons I chose the charger that I did, they're aware of this capability within the charger, but they're being close-lipped. They have to be. They can't allow announcements of programs before they're ready to actually support them. And they're not ready to support, they're gathering data with those chargers, the one that I showed you the picture of. That's what they're giving rebates on to customers, to existing Platte River Power Authority customers. But they might have this in mind. It's not a secret. And certainly I have talked to the PRPA people about this, the staff members that are associated with the new power acquisition, with the planning, and with the electric vehicle trial that they're working on themselves. So they've all seen these issues presented to them, and they just can't talk about them yet, is my belief.
Dave states that he's new to Colorado. I was wondering, does Xcel Energy have or need access to hydro to be more like PRPA?
The answer is Excel has almost no hydro, very small percentage, maybe 2%. The federal hydro that Platte River Power Authority has is for the nonprofits, for the munis and the co-ops. They're allowed to access the big hydro. There's no big hydro in Colorado at this point in time. Yeah, we have the headwaters of the Colorado, but we don't have any really great dams that have lots of head and lots of water that are in them. So our electricity from hydro comes from out of state through the Western Area Power Administration. And that's generally true. So BPA, Bonneville Power Administration, that's for Oregon and Washington State, same deal. It's the munis and the co-ops mostly that get the electricity from that. Now, here's an interesting thing though. Just because you say something is true right now doesn't mean it's going to be true in the future. In the case of the dams for Western Area Power Administration, they actually have, some of them have a lot of storage associated with them. I'd always assumed that hydro was the cheapest, old federal hydro, that's what we're talking about, is old federal hydro, was the cheapest possible electricity that you could get. And it's true that that used to be the case, and it is no longer. Solar and wind are now cheaper, now significantly cheaper than federal hydro. That means that federal hydro for the first time has competition for its usage. Oh, it's going to take a little while for that competition to take over. But when the competition does, what are they going to do? They have fixed costs. That's what those costs go to, what that charge for their electricity goes to. Maybe it'll get spread out more, not so much just for the munis and co-ops, but maybe it'll be part of the storage solution that we know we need for all electric utilities. And that's, hydro at 3 cents is still cheaper than storage costs right now for battery storage. Is that the future? Oh, I don't know. It's an interesting thing to speculate. Maybe we could model it if we get enough volunteers.
So why don't we close on this one? A possible call to action. How can we get PPRA to act more like Excel? That's the question.
I think that's backwards. I think it's how do we get Excel to act more like Platte River Power Authority? And it's easy to get all this stuff confused. The answer is there's a group of advocates. If you live in those 4 cities, Fort Collins, Longmont, Estes Park, and Loveland, you really want to be in touch with the activists that are there. They have been very effective at getting their cities to pass 100% resolutions and getting Platte River Power Authority to move ahead. PRPA is responsive. They are open in a way that we could only dream that Excel could be open. Excel considers the information that Platte River Power Authority gives away, this hourly data and their cost data, to be highly confidential information, and you can't have it unless you sign stacks of non-disclosure agreements. Well, it's kind of stupid if PRPA can give it away for free and Excel can't give it away because it's highly confidential information. That's just my personal opinion with this. So
great.
With that, and so the answer is get involved. Get involved with CRES. CRES has a policy committee. CRES has action items. Take some of the actions that I've presented and just talk this up with people. It's important that people actually understand that really we can get 95%, and it's not just the advocates saying anymore, it's the utilities. Thank you so much to Josh Valentine and Kirsten Freisinger and a whole variety of other people that made this happen. It's a lot of work to put on one of these and to moderate it. Thank you so much to the people that made this happen. Thank you so much to the 90 people that are still listening to this and that are just advocates, and to all of you that attended. Thank you again. And you want to announce future talks? Are there some future talks we can talk about?
I will announce some other things, but yes, we definitely have some future talks that we'll let you know about via email. But as you can see on your screen right now, the CRES website is a brand new website. We have upgraded our membership system, and I just want to remind people, if you go to the little the box that extends the width of the screen here, and you click on the link in the middle there, it says here, it'll bring you to some instructions on how to re-sign up for a membership. And I know there are some folks whose memberships have lapsed, folks who think that they may need to renew, but we do have a promotion going on with this new website. You're going to have to re-sign up, follow those instructions. You'll get a receipt. You'll get a login info. So you can use a promo code, which will be all caps FREESIX, FREESIX. Will get you an additional 6 months on your membership. I also want to point out that on our homepage and up top on the resources tab under video, and by clicking on the YouTube icon, but here it is on our homepage. The events module there shows our latest videos, and if you want to visit the CRES YouTube channel, that would be a great thing because we have loads of videos from past talks that you may be interested in, and it's constantly being updated. So I want to thank Ken. Great presentation, and we would love to have you back and do this another time. And thanks very much, and thanks everybody for joining. And stay safe out there, and we hope to see you in person in the very near future.
Thanks again, Josh.
Thank you.